This is Katherine Schneider from the Fitchburg Historical Society, and we are continuing our monthly interviews with Fact TV for Talking Fitchburg. Today we have Diane Reynolds from the Fitchburg Historical Society Board, who is our archivist with obituaries. So she has a key role to play in keeping track of our obituaries. And also, making sure that these things are put on our website. So Diane, thank you for being here this afternoon. Could you just describe what's available regarding obituaries on the Fitchburg Historical Society website?
Well, what we have on our website is the obituaries database. We started out collecting obituaries, just clipping them from the newspaper, or we received some from other people from Ancestry or their own personal collections, and we put them in a binder, which we still have the binder, but a couple of years ago, the obituaries that we had were scanned in, and so they're available digitally. So that's what you see on our website when you go to the obituary page. And then you'll also find links to the Find a Grave website. So you can try to look up where people are buried. And then there's a link to what's called the Fitchburg Historical Society Obituary Database, which has a lot of information. It's actually a table, and it has the name of the person who's deceased, when they were born, where they were born, if known, when they died, where they died, what other names might be included in the obituary, relative, that type of thing. Who published the obituary? Many of our obituaries do come from the Madison newspapers. So, either the Capital Times or the Wisconsin State Journal, but not all of them. And we're finding more and more now that we're also going and accessing obituaries that are on the funeral home websites, because many times they're more extensive than what might appear in the newspaper. The date that the obituary was published in the newspaper, and then if known, where they are buried. We're also finding more and more that people are being cremated, possibly more so than being buried. And so there's not always any information in the obituary about that. So that's really helpful. And then in terms of who we've selected to include in our obituary database, we're looking for people who were born in Fitchburg, possibly grew up in Fitchburg, people who have lived in Fitchburg, and also people who worked in Fitchburg, because we have a number of businesses. In our collection, we have people who worked at Blaney Farm, who worked at Playcon, which is one of the businesses in Fitchburg, and other businesses. So we also look for that type of thing. So that's what we have in our obituary collection.
That's great. It's so extensive in terms of what you're sending out your net pretty widely to find out things about Fitchburg, people who have been connected in some way to Fitchburg, that their obituaries are included. Well, Diane, how might people then make use of these obituaries?
Well, if you go to the database, it's an alphabetical listing. And so you can just go to, a selection, say A through L or whatever. I don't remember what the exact designations are, but you could just scroll through and look at the obituaries, or if you're looking for a particular person, you can check to see if we have it in our obituary listing. We always encourage people, if they're from the Fitchburg area, if their ancestors lived in Fitchburg, and if they have obituaries that they want to share, we're always looking for more. And that's how you would go about accessing the database.
So what sorts of information might be maybe interesting, surprising, valuable when looking at these obituaries?
Well, the obituaries include a wide range of information. They might include the cause of death. They might include the church affiliation, if there's any. They might tell you where the person is buried. They might tell you who attended the funeral, especially if people came from out of town. So you might be able to track other relatives who were living in other places. It might tell you what community activities the persons were involved in. For example, some areas had old settlers associations. It might tell you that. It might tell you what community groups they belong to. It might tell you their political affiliation. And it also might tell you whether or not they served in the military. And if they did serve in the military, what was it during a time of peace, or was it a particular conflict like World War II?
So really, there's like a storehouse of information possible that might lead you to other sources of information, especially if you're doing maybe genealogy, to find out even more about this person. They're kind of a touchstone for maybe other access to other information.
Right. And I looked up one, there are, Kinney's in Fitchburg, and Michael Kinney's obituary tells when he came to the United States, which was 1845, and he came from Ireland. And 1845 is part of the potato famine years. It says that he was one of the earliest Dane County settlers. He bought a farm in Fitchburg. So you could, based on that, you could look for land records from Dane County. You could look for church records, that type of thing. So it can lead you off in many different directions.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's like being almost a detective to have one thing lead to another and pick up the clues. Dan, I'm wondering if you could share maybe a story or two that really stands out to you from the Fitchburg obituary collection that you found, particularly maybe interesting.
Well, one of the things that I looked at was Bill Stoneman's obituary. And Bill was very active in the town. He was a farmer, but he was also the town assessor. And in reading his obituary, you get a lot of the history of Fitchburg. I was quite amazed. It was quite extensive. It talks about how he helped establish the Fitchburg Memorial Day service and the Fitchburg Farmers Market. So it's really interesting to look at those things. I also looked at a couple earlier obituaries. The Berry family was, they were one of the earlier settlers in Fitchburg. And the one for Bridget Berry actually talks about how her father and her brother cut stone on their farm for construction of St. Raphael's Cathedral. I'm not sure how else you would ever find that information, except that, read her obituary and there it is. And then there was also one for Amanda Dean, who had quite a kind of sad life in some ways. She was widowed twice. One of her sons died in the Civil War, but it also talks about her father was a Revolutionary War soldier. Her two brothers served in the War of 1812. And that kind of information could lead you to asking for pension records or military service records. So it's really kind of amazing what you might find. And actually in our obituary database, we have some from the 1800s, many more from the 1900s, and of course into the 2000s. So we have quite a range from the 1800s to the current day.
Great, great. Treasure stories to find,
for sure.
to uncover.
For sure.
So on just looking at you in your personally, Diane, so what drew you into volunteering for this particular role on the board to be the archivist for the obituaries?
Well, I grew up in Fitchburg, so I knew a lot of the names in Fitchburg. and have an interest in history and genealogy. I was familiar with what some of the other local historical societies were doing in terms of their collections and knew that they were collecting obituaries. And I started working with Carol Kinney and Winnie Lacey on having a specific obituary collection. I mean, they had some family information that might have included obituaries, but we didn't have a unique obituary collection. And so we started working on that, and it's just grown.
Wonderful.
So,
wonderful.
Yeah.
And so for your own family history, have you found some interesting things through obituaries, like in your own family? Do you want to share anything about that?
Well, recently I tracked down a very distant relative who lives in Montana, who is related through my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side, whose his great-great-grandmother was a sister to my great-great-grandmother. And my great-great-grandmother unfortunately passed away at a very young age. But his great-great-grandmother lived to be quite aged. And, it was kind of interesting, like, how did she end up in Montana from Wisconsin? And also the fact that, I was able to track down this gentleman who kind of was a little surprised to hear from me, I think so. But that's okay. And then I also found obituary helpful because for one of my great-grandmothers, Dane County either never had or misplaced her death certificate. So we knew the year that she had died, but we didn't have any clue about exactly when she died. And I was able to track down an obituary and find, you're going to find when you start looking.
That's great. The stories are buried there, the records, some ways that you can further your search. There's just all kinds of things that you can find from these obituaries that are of value. Diane, thank you so much. Just a wealth of information on why obituaries are important and what can be found there, and that the Fitchburg Historical Society has such depth in terms of the obituaries that are available, readily accessible just by looking online at fitchburghistory.org, and there you go, under people, and obituaries are right there. So thank you for doing this collecting through the years that you've done that. That takes a lot of dedication, but I can also tell that you enjoy it and learn so much in doing those collections for us. So we appreciate you coming to share that information with us this afternoon. And we hope people will access the website and enjoy it.
I hope so. I think they'll find it interesting.
Absolutely. Thanks, Diane.